Picture this 1940s London. A charming gentleman, well-spoken, well-dressed, blends into the bustling city life. But beneath that veneer lurks a horrifying secret. This is the story of John George Haigh, better known as the acid bath murderer, a man who dissolved his victims believing it would erase all traces of his crimes.
It's a case that captivated the public imagination not just for its gruesome nature, but for the chilling psychology of the man behind it. Today, we're diving deep into Hay's life and crimes, using court records, police reports, and first-hand accounts to understand what drove him to commit such horrific acts.
So let's start with his childhood. Haigh was raised in a strict religious household, almost completely isolated from the outside world. His parents were devout followers of the Plymouth Brethren, a sect known for its rigid interpretation of the Bible and its emphasis on separating from the perceived sins of the world.
Right, the Plymouth Brethren's beliefs had a profound impact on Hay's upbringing. His father, fearing the corrupting influence of the outside world, literally built a 10-foot fence around their home to shield young John from any perceived sinful influences.
Wow. It's hard to imagine the impact that level of isolation must have had on a developing child. No playing outside, no friends his own age, just hours spent indoors with his mother or practicing hymns on the organ. It sounds almost suffocating.
Yes, and what's particularly interesting is the paradox within this upbringing. While they isolated him physically, Hay's parents also pushed him academically. He was considered a bright student, excelling in his studies. This duality makes you wonder, was there a predisposition towards darkness already present? Or did this restrictive environment, this constant tension between isolation and achievement, contribute to his later actions?
It's a fascinating question. And it's not like things magically improved for him as he got older. Despite showing early promise in his career, he even started his own advertising company at 21. Haigh seemed drawn to quick riches and easy money, leading him down a path of petty scams and fraud.
That's right. Throughout his life, there's this recurring pattern of success, followed by self-sabotage through dishonest schemes. He couldn't seem to resist the allure of deception, the challenge of outsmarting others, even if it meant hurting people along the way. It's as if the thrill of the power it gave him became an addiction he couldn't break.
His first marriage to a woman named Beatrice Hammer ended quite dramatically after he was jailed for fraud. Beatrice, pregnant at the time, was so ashamed that she put their daughter up for adoption. She simply couldn't bear the thought of raising a child connected to a convicted criminal.
This event is significant on several levels. Firstly, the personal tragedy for both Haigh and Beatrice is undeniable, but it also marks a turning point in his life. The rejection, the public humiliation likely cemented a cynical worldview, reinforcing the idea that he was somehow outside the rules that bound ordinary people.
He did seem to bounce back, at least on the surface. He drifted around England and Scotland for a few years, honing his con artistry, posing as a solicitor, and swindling wealthy clients out of their investments. It's clear he had a talent for gaining people's trust, making them believe he was someone he wasn't.
It's chilling, really. He had this undeniable charisma and ability to identify and exploit people's vulnerabilities. It makes you wonder what qualities make someone susceptible to a con artist like Haigh. Was it naivety, a desire to see the good in people, or something else entirely?
It's a question worth pondering because this talent, this ability to manipulate, would become a key element in his later crimes. Take, for instance, Donald McSwan, the son of Hay's former employer. They reconnected years later, and McSwan, perhaps out of kindness or loyalty, helped Haigh find work. Sadly, he had no idea the danger lurking beneath that charming facade.
McSwan's disappearance is where Hay's crimes take a truly sinister turn. It wasn't just about stealing McSwan's money anymore, it was about eliminating him completely, ensuring his silence. And the method he chose, dissolving the body in acid, suggests a level of premeditation and a chilling lack of remorse that's hard to fathom.
Yeah, it's almost as if dissolving McSwan's body wasn't just about destroying evidence, but also about dehumanizing him, reducing him to nothing more than a problem to be disposed of.
It's a horrifying thought. And remember those field mice Haigh used to dissolve in acid back in prison? It's almost chilling to think that might have been practice, a way for him to experiment and refine his technique for the horrors he'd later inflict on human victims.
It's certainly a chilling possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's a stretch to connect the mice to his later crimes? Or could it have been a morbid fascination that evolved into something far more sinister? I'm not sure, but it's a disturbing thought. What's even more disturbing is that he managed to maintain this facade of normalcy for years, even as he continued to prey on vulnerable individuals. He'd befriend them, gain their trust, and then when the time was right, strike, taking their lives and their possessions with cold, calculated precision.
Right. The case of the Hendersons, an elderly couple who owned a property Haigh coveted, is a prime example of this pattern. He befriended them, playing the charming guest, exploiting their generosity and love of a good time. He learned their weaknesses, their routines, and used that knowledge to manipulate them into a position of vulnerability.
It's heartbreaking to think about. They welcomed him into their lives, treated him with kindness, and he repaid that kindness with such cruelty. He even used Archie Henderson's own revolver to kill him, a detail that just underscores his complete disregard for human life.
And the audacity of his actions didn't end there. After dissolving their bodies, he forged letters and postcards, creating this elaborate ruse that they were traveling abroad. He even sent a note to their landlady claiming they'd gone to America. It's almost as if he enjoyed the deception, the feeling of outsmarting everyone.
It's almost unbelievable that he got away with it for as long as he did.
Yeah,
But I suppose back then communication wasn't what it is today. People vanished, and sometimes there were no easy answers.
that's true. And Haigh was careful to target people who were somewhat isolated individuals whose disappearances might not immediately raise alarm bells. But his luck was about to run out.
His final victim, Olive Duran Deacon, a wealthy widow, proved to be his undoing. Like his previous victims, she was drawn to his charm and sophistication. He lured her to his workshop with a fabricated business proposition, promising her a share in a venture involving artificial fingernails.
It's a detail that's almost comical if it weren't so tragic. Think about it. This man, already responsible for multiple murders, is still concocting these elaborate ruses even as his life is spiraling out of control. He was drowning in debt, his gambling habit out of control, and he saw Olive as his ticket to financial salvation.
But unlike the others, Olive had a close friend, Constance Lane, who immediately sensed something was wrong when she didn't show up for their usual breakfast meeting. She knew Olive's routines, and this sudden disappearance was completely out of character.
Constance's persistence, her refusal to dismiss Olive's disappearance as a simple misunderstanding, proved crucial. She contacted the police, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to Haig's capture and expose the horrifying truth.
And it was a keen-eyed policewoman, Sergeant Lambourne, who first suspected Haig's involvement. She was struck by his odd demeanor, his eagerness to appear helpful, which she instinctively recognized as a facade.
Her intuition, combined with his history of financial trouble and sudden ability to pay off his debts, raised red flags for investigators. They started digging into his past, uncovering a pattern of fraud and deception that hinted at something far more sinister.
And when they searched his workshop, they found a scene that could have come straight out of a horror film: barrels of acid, a gruesome collection of personal belongings, and a receipt for a Persian lamb coat, the very same coat Olive had been wearing the day she disappeared.
It was at that moment that Haig's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Initially, he tried to deny any involvement, but as the evidence mounted, he confessed not with remorse, but with an almost chilling arrogance. He genuinely believed he had committed the perfect crime.
He famously boasted, "How can you prove murder if there's no body?" He was convinced that dissolving his victims in acid had erased all traces of his crimes. But what's fascinating is that he seemed genuinely surprised when confronted with the forensic evidence. It speaks to a level of arrogance, almost a delusion that he was untouchable.
Yeah, his trial was a media sensation, wasn't it? Fueled by the gruesome details of the crimes and his own bizarre claims, he tried to build an insanity defense, weaving tales of a bloodlust stemming from a recurring dream he called the dream of the bleeding Christ. He even claimed to have been drinking his own urine since childhood. It was also outlandish.
Right, it was a performance, really.
Yeah.
He seemed to be creating this character, this vampire killer persona, perhaps to distance himself from the cold, calculated reality of his actions.
But the experts saw right through it, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. The psychiatrist who examined him concluded he was likely malingering, exaggerating, or fabricating symptoms to avoid responsibility.
And despite the lack of complete bodies, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Absolutely. Scotland Yard's top pathologist, Dr. Keith Sampson, meticulously examined the remnants found in Haig's workshop. He uncovered bone fragments, a partial denture, and even a piece of Olive's red handbag. All of these conclusively linked him to her murder.
It's remarkable how science ultimately triumphed over Haig's attempts to erase all traces of his victims. He thought he'd outsmarted the system, but even the most powerful acid couldn't dissolve the truth.
Right. The jury deliberated for a mere 20 minutes before finding Haigh guilty. He was sentenced to death, and when asked if he had anything to say, he simply replied, "None at all," with a chilling smile on his face. It's a detail that speaks volumes about his lack of remorse, his inability to grasp the gravity of his actions.
Even facing execution, he continued to play games, claiming to have killed 3 more people, murders that were never corroborated. It seems like he wanted to maintain a sense of control, to leave a legacy of fear and uncertainty, even as his own life was coming to an end.
In the end, John George Haigh was hanged on August 10, 1949. A crowd of hundreds gathered outside the prison, cheering as news of his death spread. It was a visceral reaction, a collective sigh of relief that this monster who had preyed on the vulnerable and sought to erase them from existence would no longer be able to inflict his horrors upon the world.
So what can we learn from the chilling story of the acid bath murderer?
It's a stark reminder that evil can lurk beneath the most charming of facades, that unchecked greed can drive a person to unimaginable acts of cruelty. But it also highlights the importance of critical thinking, of questioning assumptions, and recognizing the vulnerabilities that con artists and manipulators exploit. These are lessons that remain relevant even today in a world where deception and misinformation are increasingly prevalent.
Right. Haig's story also underscores the enduring power of memory and the importance of seeking justice for those who have been silenced. While he tried to erase his victims, their stories live on, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Let their fates serve as a reminder to be vigilant, to be compassionate, and to never underestimate the depths of human darkness or the power of truth and justice to prevail.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. The truth is out there waiting to be discovered.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the unsettling world of John George Haigh, the acid bath murderer. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe for more captivating explorations into the complexities of the human condition.